Hey, everybody, and welcome to this week's Free Assange Vigil. This is our second one that we're doing. We're doing them Tuesdays, Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern, and then Saturdays at 1 p.m. Eastern. Um, and today is 25 days until the start of the second round of Julian Assange's extradition hearing. It is 3,425 days since the start of his arbitrary and illegal detention. It is 375 days since the trafficking of Julian Assange to Belmarsh prison after a $4.2 billion international monetary loan fund to the nation of Ecuador. It is 1,055 days since Reality Winner was taken into federal custody for leaking classified information. And on the happy note, it is 42 days since Chelsea Manning was released following the 10-year-long grand jury against WikiLeaks being closed. And before we start, if we could get this pulled up real quick, that tweet that's there from Chelsea, Josh, because this is the first thing that's gone out on her Twitter since she was released from custody. So I just kind of want to give this a shout out for everybody. Just saying that she's been doing good and she's out and about. So yeah, I'm eternally happy that she is free and that Jeremy Hammond will soon see his freedom, barring any other kind of craziness that happens behind the scenes. This week, it is myself, Andrew Smith, Steve Poikinen, and our wonderful friend Misty, Sarcasm Stardust, that will be hosting. And then we have special guest Lissa Johnstone. And later on, we will have Elizabeth Mueller joining us as well. How are you today, Lissa?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me. Just unmuting myself.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on with us. So you are one of the doctors behind the Doctors for Assange campaign, which has actually seen a lot of success and caught a lot of traction. If you could you talk for a little bit about what Doctors for Assange is and kind of how the whole thing got started?
Yeah, well, so the whole thing, we're around 200 doctors and psychologists now from, I think, 31 countries. And it all started in November last year when some doctors got together and wrote a letter. Back then it was 65 doctors was signed on to a letter, which was written after a case management hearing where Julian Assange looked really unwell, and there were some really disturbing eyewitness accounts from Craig Murray and John Pilger and Julian's dad, John. He struggled to answer questions about his name and his date of birth, and he looked frail and prematurely aged. So that alarmed the doctors. And then Nils Meltzer, early in November, issued a warning saying, he'd already issued reports saying Julian Assange is being psychologically tortured, this must end. And he said, well, if these inhumane conditions don't cease now in Belmarsh prison, it may soon cost his life. And the doctors understood how serious that was and that there's a real medical basis for that. The UN Rapporteur on Torture doesn't say something like that lightly. So the doctors got together and wrote a letter to the UK Home Secretary, kind of underlining that and going through in quite a bit of detail a history of medical neglect in the Ecuadorian embassy. So there's this combination in Julian Assange's case of prolonged psychological torture, 10 years worth. And, it's difficult to get people to understand how serious that is, and maybe we can talk about it. But, it's very damaging medically as well as psychologically and mentally. It undermines people's health in all sorts of ways. So that combined with not just medical neglect, but obstruction of access to healthcare in the Ecuadorian embassy. So the doctors detailed that in a letter. Obviously it's much more serious even now than it was in November because of coronavirus. So, in the medical history that the doctors detailed, as far back as 2015, doctors who examined Julian Assange said, look, his health is really fragile, and anything more than a trivial illness could place his life at risk. That was 2015. Here we are 5 years later, coronavirus raging through Belmarsh prison. His health is even more fragile after even more years of psychological torture. So, since November, the doctors have written a number of letters to governments really trying to get that across and trying to essentially say in, more complex ways, we're serious, we mean it, we're worried for his life on medical grounds. He needs to be, he needs to be out of there urgently. as a life-saving measure. So we've written to the UK Secretary of State for Justice, the Australian government, who replied, and we wrote back to them again. We've had an article letter published in The Lancet. And at the moment, actually, we've got articles we're trying to get published, one in particular in medical journals about the threat posed by COVID-19. And although we got a lot of coverage in the past, last year and early this year, a lot of media coverage, which was great and really kind of broke through a bit, especially the Lancet letter, because that was called End Torture and Medical Neglect of Julian Assange. So that got the media talking more about the T word than they would have and that they were willing to before. But I have to say, since the extradition hearing started, we can't penetrate. Press releases aren't being taken up. We wrote another letter to the Australian government that wasn't reported, despite going out to media. And we're really struggling at the moment to get an article about the threat posed by COVID-19 published in medical journals. We'll keep trying, but that's
if I could,
broad brush.
I would say there would probably be more luck in getting that circulated through the independent U.S. media than there would be through mainstream sources. So that may be an option if you email it to people like the Jimmy Dores and the Fault Lines and the Ron Pauls of the world. They may be more apt to pick it up and run with it than a mainstream media source would right now.
Yeah, true. Yeah, which we are trying as well.
I would also recommend. Also recommend reaching out to Mohammed El-Mazi.
He's great. Yeah, he covers. He does a brilliant job.
And also Tarek Haddad, because I'm 99% sure that his new outlet, The Watchdog, would rent that for you.
Yeah, he's brilliant too. In fact, when the first letter went out, his article on it was by far the most comprehensive, and he went into a lot of depth. So it was it was a real loss when he left Newsweek, because he was doing a brilliant job there.
Well, and that's
he's doing a great job now. He's doing a brilliant job now. Yeah.
And that's Newsweek's loss for refusing to print accurate material.
Yes,
because he had brought to them, the WikiLeaks drops on the OPCW report and said, I would like to do a story about this. And they said, no.
Yeah, it's shocking, isn't it? Absolutely shocking. Yeah.
Well, it shocked him. Like I came as a complete surprise, and he had a crisis of conscience over it, and debated whether or not to leave for a little while, and then said, "No, I have to do this. I can't be subjected to censorship in my chosen profession. I'll go do my own thing."
Yeah, well, I mean, and all power to him. That's fantastic. Good on him. But it's a sad though sort of snapshot of where the media is at, and one of the many reasons that Julian Assange's case is so important, isn't it? Because that's where we're going. If you want to tell the truth, you have to leave the mainstream. You have to go into independent media. You have to go out on your own. It's increasingly becoming the only way it's possible to do that, isn't it? So it's great that he did that, but it's very sort of relevant to Julian Assange's case that he had to do that. Here we are. We've got the OPCW leak is evidence of being lied into war yet again, and nobody will touch it. It's really, really
and not just lied to, but tricked into.
Crime scene staged. That's right, by a trusted organization. Reported on by a trusted organization. Sorry.
And no repercussions whatsoever for the people at the top of the OPCW who were directed by the U.S. State Department to, have this conclusion and work backwards until they could kind of prove it. The people who have gotten in trouble over it were the first two whistleblowers. Very, very, it mirrors what happened with the collateral murder video. Nobody who shot unarmed civilians or shot children or shot Reuters journal, people who work for Reuters, faced a single charge. Yet Chelsea Manning spent 77% of her adult life locked up at that point, and Julian remains illegally and arbitrarily incarcerated.
Exactly. Yes. Which is, even if Julian Assange isn't extradited, and one of the things that the doctors are talking about and trying to raise awareness of is that there's a second precedent being set right now, which is that a publisher is being tortured before our eyes in plain sight with impunity for publishing factual information, you know, for helping people to understand that 2 children had their father slaughtered in front of them. A Reuters photojournalist was shot down for absolutely no reason. We just, you know, all that Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning and Kristen Hrafson from WikiLeaks did was try to help people to understand what was going on and understand, you know, the significance of those deaths and tens of thousands of others. And so, you know, the chilling precedent, even if the Espionage Act is never used against Julian Assange, the fact that he's being subjected to this long, slow, cruel, vicious, you know, destruction by psychological torture and medical neglect is a really terrible precedent in itself. And I know you guys were talking about that a little bit a couple of weeks ago about the self-censorship that's happening now and the fear that that's creating now, even in independent media that's being censored if they talk about Julian Assange.
It is pervasive and it is unfortunate. And it's a symptom of of where we're at right now, not just in terms of like Western or US society, but where journalism is. You don't get anywhere. And I mean, traditionally you don't get anywhere without playing ball, but now it's even more stark than it has been, basically since the release of the DNC emails, the Podesta emails, both 7 and 8. The way that journalists have responded to it, to me, is incredibly disheartening. Particularly the Press Freedom Foundation, the way they just hurled Julian under the bus, and that was an organization that he helped create, and he helped create it to skirt around the persecution that WikiLeaks was facing in terms of people supporting it. And now this organization is like, yeah, no, we never heard of them.
Yeah, it's shameful, isn't it? I mean, there are, though, a lot of heavy-hitting human rights and press freedom and international law groups. You know, probably the biggest and, you know, most respected are in Julian Assange's corner. That's another thing that's not reported. I think that's really, you know, that's a big deal and it's underplayed. And, I mean, that's something that can help establishment types to get on board too, to know that you're actually not out on a limb. There's Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, of course, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. There's also, you know, and Nils Melzer, Rapporteur on Torture, but there's also the Council of Europe, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, International Bar Association, Human Rights Institute, International Observatory for Human Rights. You know, these are sort of really highly respected on the world stage, and they're making very strong statements about not just saying, oh, look, you know, not even just talking about journalism being criminalised, but saying the extradition request must be denied, Julian Assange must be set free. This is a threat to human rights and press freedom. So it's a really quite a surreal situation where you've got the world's leading human rights and international law authorities saying, no, this has to stop. The media's not really reporting that. It's continuing. You've got doctors, you've got international jurists, you've got how many journalists signed that letter? I mean, an enormous number of journalists signed an open letter call. So you've got, you know, the main professional bodies coming forward too and saying, look, we're standing with these human rights and international law organisations, saying medically, legally, and in terms of press freedom, this is a travesty of historic proportions. You know, in this test case where we're trying to redefine, well, the US government, with the help of the UK government, is trying to redefine journalism as espionage. You know, and the publisher at the heart of it is being treated inhumanely in this politicized landmark test case, you know, trial.
You had talked a little bit in the beginning about the health risks that Julian faces, and everyone knows the fact that COVID-19 is now rampant inside of Belmarsh prison. I believe Glenn Greenwald said yesterday that there has been at least a few deaths inside of Belmarsh from COVID-19. Could you talk a little bit, though, about the pre-existing health conditions that Julian had going into this situation, as well as how the continued solitary confinement and detention has affected that?
Yeah, and that's really important. Well, there's a few grounds on which Julian is medically vulnerable to COVID-19. So one is persistent respiratory issues. He's had a number of lung infections. And that does happen to people in prisons and in solitary. It's something you read about. So that obviously anybody with lung conditions and respiratory issues is more vulnerable to COVID-19. After a decade of psychological torture, he would have seriously compromised immunity. There's a lot of literature on this chronic psychological stress, and he's been under extreme, relentless psychological stress and trauma and threat and danger. And helplessness particularly feeds into this. Immunity is suppressed. Immune cells physically self-destruct. The body stops producing immune cells. Communication between immune cells is disrupted. And that manifests differently in different people. Just like we all under stress, someone might get a headache, someone else might get a rash. That chronic psychological stress and the suppressed immunity can manifest in all kinds of ways, which is what the doctors have been warning about. It can cause cancer. It can cause cardiovascular failure. It can cause atypical infections. So even without COVID-19, that suppressed immunity means that just a normal infection could kill Julian Assange or anyone subjected to that level of extreme chronic stress. And here we have COVID-19. It's really lethal to vulnerable people. So that's very dangerous. And it's precisely the kind of non-trivial illness that doctors have been warning about going back years in Julian Assange's case. And then he has a number of conditions that have been untreated. Back in, I think it was 2015, doctors said, look, he needs an MRI, he needs possibly, quite complex surgery that has to be done in a hospital, not an embassy, not a prison medical board. He's never had that MRI. He's had exposed dental pulp, and, extremely painful. That required hospital treatment, which he hasn't received. And instead, what's happened, so anyway, they're the things that make him vulnerable to COVID-19. He's untreated recurrent infections, the immunosuppression of chronic psychological torture, and a lung condition. So it's urgent that he's released from Belmarsh Prison on bail. And really shocking that the emergency bail request was denied. Was it on the 25th of March? The court heard evidence of at least the respiratory issues, and all of the other medical issues are on the record, public record. So he's really being left in harm's way. He's being put in harm's way in front of a lethal virus, and also keeping him in there on bail flies in the face of an international human rights consensus on prisoner release in light of COVID-19. And there's been quite a few reports, and essentially prisons act as what they call epidemiological pumps, where the virus, experiences explosive transmission inside the prison, and then everyone who comes and goes from the prison spreads it. I think in some US states, almost 4 out of 10 of COVID cases can be traced back to prisons. So for that reason, for the health of the prisoners, because they can't practice physical distancing and the hygiene isn't what you need to prevent transmission. There's international bodies have issued guidelines. The World Health Organization and the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights have issued some guidelines about prisoner release under COVID-19, and Julian Assange meets all the criteria. He's unsentenced, he's unconvicted, he's being held without sufficient legal basis under international law, which is one of the criteria. Anybody detained for publishing activity, they said, should be released, and they said that anybody being arbitrarily detained should be released, and the world's authority on arbitrary detention has found that Julian Assange is being arbitrarily detained. So, there's absolutely no justification for not granting him emergency bail. He meets every single internationally agreed criteria. So,
well, one of the things that Julian is, go ahead, Misty. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. No, I know what you're talking about this because I live in Ohio and there's a prison here that 73% of the population has COVID-19. And that's crazy to me to think that Julian's in, a situation where, and I also wanted to ask you too, we were just talking about on Tuesday, the SAMs, the special administrative measures, and what he's facing there too is also going to be psychologically, draining and intense, and kind of does that put on him as far as that goes?
Yeah, that's an understatement. I know you guys know that. You talked about it in detail the other week. Yeah, it was a really great discussion that you had. Well, SAM's special administrative measures, it ticks every single box for psychological torture. So there's it's extreme solitary confinement, which is very serious. Hopefully we'll talk about that a bit more when we go into SAM's more. But there's a great report in March to the UN Human Rights Council laying out the different components of psychological torture, and SAM's inflicts every single one. Which, you know, it's extreme solitary confinement, it's extreme sensory deprivation, it's constant surveillance, it's dehumanizing, it attacks a person's dignity and identity, it's renders them powerless and helpless, stops them from preparing their defense because they can't meet with their lawyers. And, you know, it's in fact, there was a report by a group in 2016, the Lowenstein Human Rights and Constitutional Rights Centre, I think, and they said that SAMS constitutes the most extreme solitary confinement that any government anywhere inflicts. So it means the US is leading the way in psychological torture.
Well, Julian has long talked about punishment as process. And what we've seen with the entirety of the situation from the moment that he was granted asylum, and I get so angry when people frame it as he fled to the embassy. This was a process that he went through and was granted specifically because he was a target of a foreign government. But from the time that he went in till right now, the way that it's played out is entirely emblematic of punishment as process, and also the complete erosion of rule of law, rule of international law, and it raises the question, what the hell good is the law for if this is taking place and all apparently quote unquote legal?
Yeah, well, the special administrative measures, you know, they just on the face of it violate the Convention Against Torture. I mean, the fact that it's endless solitary confinement alone, but that's only one of the psychological torture sort of tactics that they implement. And under the Convention Against Torture, no exceptional circumstances can be invoked to inflict torture. So there's no legal justification for something like SAM. You know, whether it's war or, you know, internal unrest or emergency, that the convention's very clear that torture is never okay. And the previous rapporteur on torture said that in the case of one detainee who'd been detained for a couple of years, said that SAM's violated the Convention Against Torture. So you have a UN rapporteur on torture saying that it violates the Convention Against Torture. You have this great report in 2016 that I just dug up yesterday after watching you guys show. Really, really ripped SAMS apart. It's worth reading it, and really talks about what's happened in a couple of cases, quite shocking. And they're saying that it's cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment at the very least. So it wouldn't be legal under international law, and really states, they can't, under the Convention Against Torture, give themselves legal loopholes. So the other thing I would say about SAMS, I mean, I know we're going to talk about it in a bit more detail, but there's a psychology of torture and atrocity, you know, how states and authorities package torture so that populations will accept it. And there's a bunch of ways to sanitize torture so that people don't really see it as torture. And one is what they call euphemistic labeling. So you don't call torture torture, you call it anodyne, neutral, you know, trivial sounding things like special administrative measures. And then special administrative measures is a classic euphemistic labeling of torture. It really should be, yeah. So they should call it, SAM should be, you know, state authorized mental torture, because that's what it is. Yeah.
And we had it with the enhanced interrogation during the Bush era as well.
Exactly.
When they relabeled waterboarding and literally tying chains around someone's neck and beating them against a wall for hours as interrogation, when there's nothing interrogatory about that, if that's even a word, but that is 100% a display of dominance.
Exactly.
So SAMS has very specific guidelines for the way that they lay out and manipulate the reality around the prisoner for who and how and what they can contact. And I think a lot of what we're seeing in the UK right now for Julian Assange and the way that the situation around him has been built seems very, very much like Sam's, short of allowing the few people he is allowed to contact to be able to talk to the press still or write an article when they get a phone call from Julian. Could you, before we transition into like pulling up the articles and stuff, could you talk a little bit about what he's facing in the UK right now and the way that it may be similar to Sam's?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, they're absolutely parallel, and the strategies are the same. They're just more extreme in Sam's, a lot more extreme. But in both cases, there have been these sort of rights-free hellholes created in the war on terror, and so far they've mostly been used against Islamic men who've been demonized, obviously, under the war on terror, under Islamophobia. So it's been possible to do that without people caring and knowing because of the demonization of Middle Eastern men. And now that abusive license is really being expanded. It's being expanded to Julian Assange, and as you guys and everybody are talking about, it won't stop with him. It's, the whole point of torture is to communicate to people watching that this is what will happen to you if you do what this guy did. So this is communicating to journalists, activists, dissidents, anybody who's thinking of disobeying and dissenting. This is what we do. And so it's this expansion of that abusive license, both in Belmarsh and SAMS represents that, because they're both, Belmarsh is apparently primarily a sort of for terrorism offences, or that's one of its main uses. So in both cases, those 9/11 abuses are being expanded to journalism, essentially, and publishing and dissent. So in both cases, you have the solitary confinement, the social isolation, which is extremely damaging. It attacks people psychologically quite viciously from the inside in a range of ways. It attacks the brain. The brain really rapidly starts to, cease to function normally, and people are, extremely traumatized and dehumanized by it. So there's that. There's the sensory deprivation. So in sterile environments, that's more extreme. In SAMS, we're in a tiny room, I heard you guys saying, with a low window, with no sound, not even vents to communicate with others. In Belmarsh, similar, there's the social isolation, the restricted activities. The understimulation is very dangerous, can cause even hallucination. It causes all sorts of, those two things, a certain level of social interaction and stimulation, are, not just nice to have for human beings, they're minimum necessary requirements for human functioning, a lot like food and water. So psychologically depriving people of those things is like depriving them of food and water. And then there's the being rendered helpless in the face of threat in both cases. Here Julian Assange has had a lot of trouble meeting with his lawyers, not nearly adequate for what he needs to defend himself against these really complex indictments. Under SAMS, it would be even worse. Meetings with lawyers are surveilled. They're very restricted. Because people are being surveilled, they're very careful what they talk about. Lawyers can't talk about it with anybody else, etc. Restricted access to information from the outside, which is part of the, the sensory deprivation. And then in both cases, there's the attacks on dignity and identity, the dehumanization of it. When people who've been in solitary are interviewed afterwards, they'll talk about the fact that they felt like they were being treated like an animal, and that because they have to be objectified to be treated that way, guards treat them more as though they're subhuman. They get, they get worse food, they get neglected. So there's that sort of, just dehumanization and feral treatment that's part of it, which is part of psychological torture. And then there's also the arbitrariness, which is a big part of psychological torture. Julian's now and there, where you can't rely on the law, you can't rely on due process. There's no way you can plan what you're going to do to protect yourself against all of this, because whatever you do, the law just does its own thing. You're not protected by human rights. You're not protected by, fair trial protections. Under SAMS, it's even worse. Nobody can even know what's happening to you. There's no right of appeal. There's no way to appeal being put into SAMS. So that's happening. That's been happening all the way, obviously, through Julian Assange's persecution. It's been arbitrary, which is why the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention said he's being arbitrarily detained. You know, Niels Meltzer documented 50 due process and rule of law violations in the Swedish investigation alone. So on all of those levels, they're similar. And the fact that Julian knows that that's waiting for him in the US if he goes there is a big part of his psychological torture now, because he's living under the threat of that, which is psychologically, emotionally worse than facing death. I mean, to be subjected to a life of just, that's like the most extreme psychological misery and suffering you could possibly inflict on a person without probably killing them, like keeping them alive but, you know, tormenting them. I mean, he's facing that now. He knows he's facing that now. He's read the Guantanamo operating procedures manuals. He knows what goes on. He knows how people are treated. He's looking down the barrel of that while he's being inhibited from defending himself in Belmarsh. So the two things are all, you know, inextricably sort of tied up, and there are those parallels.
I think this is a good time to go ahead and bring in our next guest and kind of kick off the thorough conversation about special administrative measures. So please welcome to the show for the first time, activist and researcher extraordinaire, Elizabeth Mueller. And if you can go ahead and unmute now, I'm going to ask you how you're doing.
Hi everyone. How are you? I don't know if you can see me, but I don't even know where to begin. I was going to add a few things that you were saying, Lisa. You made some excellent points, and when you were talking, it made me think of a part of Naomi Klein's book called Shock Doctrine, where she talked about like these horrible experiments that the government did on people, and what she was saying is that the brain, the neural pathways will end up.
Oh, Kevin.
Hopefully she'll be able to rejoin us in a minute. We call our intelligence agency handler Kevin. For literally no particular reason. The chat picked the name almost a year ago at this point for us.
Funny.
So
Well,
whenever we have those strange technical issues, like 100% internet to 0, we try to blame it on him. But I think we may have her back.
Oh, are you back?
Yep, you're back. You can continue from where you were talking about, Liz.
Oh, okay. Just that, you know, he's not just, and I think you made a good point. You pointed this out, Lisa. It's not just psychological torture. It's physical torture, because when you don't get enough stimulation, your brain neural pathways will basically pare down, and it's almost giving people indirectly a form of brain damage over time. And also, I was going to talk about the post-traumatic stress disorder of going through something like that. It also made me think of some studies that I've read about with Elizabeth Gould at Princeton University, and she talks about how brain cells regenerate, but if you have cortisol, which is, you know, produced with extreme stress, your brain cells won't go through this process of regenerating parts of or certain brain cells, and that can lead to people also having brain damage over time. So, I mean, I'm not saying that this is happening specifically to Julian now exactly, but it's certainly not helping him. And it's terrifying. I mean, when you hear all these stories about him coming to the court and he can't, you know, he's saying, I'm having trouble thinking, I'm having trouble, you know, gathering my thoughts about things, you know, you feel so sad for him, because you think, you know, this is a man that's not only being psychologically tortured, but physically tortured as well. So anyway, I just wanted to add that. But
yeah, well, that's true. I mean, everything you say is right, and you know, it's in terms of medically and the brain, and there are studies of the brain in solitary confinement, social isolation, and even after just 7 days, brain activity decreases, and after 2 weeks, it starts to show up in concentration and memory, and even after just 7 days to 2 weeks, that can be permanent. It doesn't say it will be, mean it will be, but it can. And the hippocampus suffers damage, which is to do with memory and learning and emotional shrinkage of the brain in solitary confinement. So it's very real physical damage to the brain that does play out in terms of people's abilities. And someone like Julian Assange, psychologists talk about it in terms of premorbid functioning. If you have a really strong brain beforehand, you'll fare better with any kind of brain damage. But Julian Assange is a human being, and all human beings would suffer this, just like all human bodies would suffer if you deprive him of food and water, and he probably would recover if it stopped. And the thing about post-traumatic stress, that's really true too about cortisol. And the trouble with ongoing torture is it's not post. It's ongoing traumatic stress. It's post-traumatic implies it's over, and then it's but with 10 years of psychological torture, it's constant trauma that never ever stops. So it's even worse than PTSD, but same kind of thing, but just never stopping.
Yeah. So anyway, a lot of things that you were saying were really striking a chord in me and resonating. And I didn't want to interrupt anyone's train of thought. I had some more positive ideas of maybe some actions, and I thought I'd talk about them later, but I, by all means, want everyone to continue the conversation where you were, and I can add things along the way.
I just had one thought as we were talking, that it's been a point that doctors have been making as we were talking about psychological torture and how serious it is that in Belmarsh prison, it goes back to that thing of Belmarsh and Sams having parallels. Belmarsh is claiming, and authorities are claiming Julian's getting medical care there, but the thing is he's being tortured there. So by definition, you can't medically treat a torture victim while you're continuing to torture them, and that's exactly what's going on right now in Julian Assange's case.
So if we could we pull our first SAM slide up for the evening? Because we have a couple that we want to go through as like our continued report here about SAMs and about the situation. This is section 5. SAMs constitutes inhumane treatment and may amount to torture. There is a broad and growing consensus that the standard condition of prolonged solitary confinement causes serious and often indelible harm in just after a few weeks. The United Nations Standard Minimum Rules for the Treatment of Prisoners, or the Mandela Rules, named for Nelson Mandela, define prolonged as beyond 15 days, which after continued isolation constitutes cruel and inhumane and degrading treatment, and under the conditions, torture. For prisoners under SAMs, isolation lasts at least a year and typically far longer. A 2003 count showed that 82% of prisoners placed under SAMs were under the restrictions for more than a year. Of those prisoners, 13 had lived under SAMs for more than a decade. Could you talk a little, Lissa, about what at that range, after 10 years of that intense isolation, just effects beyond what we've already talked about could come about from it?
It's horrendous, utterly horrendous. I mean, you think that after 1 to 2 weeks, you can suffer permanent effects. 10 years, I mean, it's just almost impossible to even conceptualize what that would be like for the person. Well, it is impossible, really, to conceptualize what that would be like for them. Should we recap what SAMS is for people who weren't watching your show last time? That when people are under special administrative measures, that they can't communicate with anybody but some lawyers and family. That's extremely limited. The lawyers and family can't even talk about to each other what they've discussed with the person in SAMS.
Yeah, there's a 2-stage gag order that is issued when you are under special administrative measures, and that is obviously you don't get to communicate with the press whatsoever, but your lawyers don't, anyone who comes to visit you, anyone in your purview is under that gag order as well, to the point to where an FBI agent is appointed to sit in on your visits and can at any moment during an interactive real-time conversation interrupt and censor what you're discussing.
Yeah, and they're very infrequent, aren't they, too, the visits? You get very, very little, and 3 pages of communication, isn't it? A month?
I'm going to pull it up from last week's, at least on my end, so I can have it in front of me.
So people know what we're talking about.
Yeah. But while I'm doing that, if anyone wants to hop in, please do, so it's not just, you know, dead
Did you want
air.
to talk a
Yeah,
little bit
welcome
about
to
the
the
actions you had mentioned earlier, Liz, while we get that pulled up?
Sure. I kind of feel like a little bit of a broken record because I always put it in the chat when you guys are on screen. And I've talked about it to other people before, but I really have this amazing vision of just mass, what is it called? Projection bombing or whatever. Like, since we're all under lockdown with coronavirus, if there is any way to do that cheaply, I think it would be amazing to get just even a couple people and create a slideshow, use a lot of the leaked documents, show the story, like maybe do like a 5-minute story of Julian Assange and why it's important to everyone out there, and get megaphones and go out at night and find a apartment building and put it up there and just scream at everybody in the apartment building and just be like, we need everyone to come to the window right now. This is so important. And have it be a really disciplined message where, you know, number one, this is the story. Number one, this is why it applies to you. Number three, these are the actions we need you to take, please. And go to this webpage, go to this vigil. Thank you so much for listening. Peace out. And then, you know, run away before the cops get there, and then just get to the next neighborhood, like maybe half an hour away. Check the laws. I don't want anyone getting arrested, but how amazing would that be if we just had like people all over the country, in all countries, going out there late at night, like on a nightly basis, and they just couldn't stop us. And we just start bringing in new people all the time into our actions over and over and over again. That's what I want to do. I want to pound them. I'm taking sort of I'm obviously this has been done before over in London and other places. They've already done the projection bombing, but I'd like to take it to a mass scale, and I'd really like to, just have it very focused on bringing more and more people into it, and then using like leaked documents to really prove our points in the quick presentation. And there was something else I was going to say, but I'm blanking out. I'm sorry. But I just want like everyone out on the street, because I know what I was going to say. When I lived in Portland, I'm taking kind of a page from those crazy in quotes animal rights activists who would go out, and they were ballistic. I mean, they would go to like CEOs' houses and get the megaphones out and be like, "Wake up!" you know, and I don't know if we have to be that drastic, but, you know, because I don't want people getting arrested. I really don't. And I don't want us to get a reputation for being too crazy. But it would be so amazing. And also videotape everyone doing it, so it would catch on like a little trend. But I don't know. Sorry, go ahead.
We've had really good conversations with Patrick Henningsen and a couple other guests about why the hell aren't we door stopping people anymore? Remember 10 years ago when there were, you know, thousands of people who had a camera and had a viewpoint who would refuse to give politicians or CEOs or whomever a moment's peace. And that's what we need. If they're not uncomfortable, we're doing our jobs wrong as activists. We've got to drive home that point that no, we're not going to let you get away with torturing this man anymore. We're not going to let you get away with torturing Chelsea Manning anymore, Jeremy Hammond anymore. When we went to DC, when we went to Arlington, Virginia, to the William Truesdale Detention Center that housed Chelsea Manning and Jeremy Hammond, we were as loud and obnoxious as we could possibly be, to the point to where we were underneath an overpass that acted like a tunnel, and there were 30 or 40 of us that were blowing these whistles as loud as we possibly could. I still have ear damage and a little bit of PTSD from that. But I mean, I'm not going to take full credit, you know, that Action for Assange and People's Power Assembly were ultimately what freed Chelsea Manning. But 2 weeks later, Chelsea Manning was out of there. So maybe they don't ever want to hear the whistles anymore, but we'll bring them back. We will. I absolutely agree that finding ways to project onto the side of buildings, things like collateral murder, or things like there was just it's about 3.5 minutes long or 2.5 minutes long, but it was a YouTube video that Greek Emmy posted this morning that details chronologically exactly what happened to Julian Assange and specifically debunks the rape allegations. And it's excellent. I'm going to contact the person who made it and ask for permission to play it Saturday or next Tuesday. But I mean, these are very necessary steps that we have taken and will continue to take. It's getting a crowd or people all over the world, realistically, to kind of try and coordinate an action, which we've been doing with these virtual marches that have been going on the past couple of weeks. And those have been incredible, and the different kinds of supporters and different kinds of authorities that have been able to weigh in during this. It brings way more legitimacy to it than just simply hanging out on YouTube and screaming about it.
And something too, if there's anyone that's interested in getting involved in any actions, I'll drop the link into the chats again. Each week we're going to be releasing a different group of actions that people can take online right now. And that's just out of respect for the pandemic that's currently underway. If you are someone that would like to take street action, please do so in a responsible and mature manner to not violate anyone's right to not be infected. But this week, we have, I think, 5 or 6 different petitions for people to sign, and also the Twitter handles and local office numbers of all the senators that signed the open letter to Lenin Moreno asking for Julian Assange's asylum to be removed. We ask that you be polite, but we can't control if you are not. But if you could, please message them on Twitter and tag us in it, or use hashtag Action for Assange, or send it to us in a DM, and we'll amplify and retweet it. So if you could, please go onto that website. It's just on Action for Assange. It's week 42 Tuesday actions. Again, I'm going to be planning them out a bit longer. Next week we'll probably have 6 or 7, and I'll make sure I get them out on social media all week for people too. But the hope is that every week we can pick a new group of senators and organizations that we can target to say, hey, where are you on this issue?
And I'm going to go ahead and I can bring up the overview to bring it back to Sam's. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the overview here on the share screen real quick. Because this is Lissa's right. This is something we do need to reiterate real quick. So very quickly, SAMs can be imposed before, during, or after trial. SAMs prohibit prisoners who live under them from contact or communication with all but a handful of approved individuals, and impose a second gag order on even those few individuals. For example, lawyers, friends, and family may not be able to talk about the case to media or associates. They prohibit defendants, attorneys, and their families from communicating about the SAMs themselves to each other or anyone else. They can also be used to prevent or impede access to family, friends, legal counsel, and prohibit information from external sources, including media, including TV, radio, newspapers, mail, phone calls, and the internet. SAMs can create isolation that is even more extreme than solitary confinement, and essentially render prisoners either physically and or mentally unfit to stand trial. They can be used to enforce draconian conditions like mandatory strip searches for already secure prisoners. They can be imposed for up to a year without requiring review. And that's something that we did. We touched on it a little bit. Elizabeth Voss was on Tuesday and made the salient point that half of these or more Julian Assange is already being subjected to, and including the humiliating multiple strip searches that he had to endure on his way to the courtroom. And again, this is a man who is in the Guantanamo Bay of the United Kingdom. It's not an insecure facility. And for him to be marched into a room for the sole purpose of being stripped naked and probed is a show of force and nothing else. Well, nothing else outside of completely insane.
Yeah, and that, I mean, and also there were precursors to that in the Ecuadorian embassy. So what we're seeing is a gradual escalation and intensification of these principles and tactics of inhibiting his right to prepare his defense, of the arbitrariness, of the surveillance, of the isolation, rendering him utterly helpless in the face of mortal threat. I mean, that's one of the, one, as well as social isolation, one of the worst things you can do to human beings. And that's another way that persecutors package up the torture so that populations will accept it. You gradually escalate it. That's what we're seeing in Julian Assange's case. It's really sort of classic habituation to atrocity and to human rights abuse. And Sam's would be, hopefully that won't happen, but would be the sort of, nth degree, but it's happening in Belmarsh. And for that, I mean, he already has had 10 years of milder versions of that, but if someone was in Sam's for 10 years, they're usually facing a long time in prison, often unsentenced on remand, so innocent, in the eyes of the law, being subjected to this, which would be the case in Julian Assange's case. And this report by the Human Rights and Constitutional Rights Centre said that it's often used coercively, which is another problem with it. It's used when they want people to confess or accept a plea deal or whatever, and then they let them out once they do confess or accept a plea deal. And there's a case in here of a man who was put in there simply because he had some socks and some other personal items of someone who was suspected of being associated with Al-Qaeda, and they kept him there for years until he finally gave them the confession that they wanted, which is what torture does. It just gets people to tell you what you want to hear so that you'll stop. It doesn't get accurate information. So 10 years of that, I mean, you would expect, well before the 10-year point that people can't think straight to engage in their own defense. A lot of people would early on in that start suffering from hallucinations, hearing things, seeing things. A lot of people would become suicidal. People do things to stimulate themselves, and that can be self-harm, just to feel something, just to get out the aggression. Prisoners in social isolation talk about suppressing their feelings too, because if they show too much emotion, then they might, be treated even worse. There might be even more restriction. Also, they're just trying to stop themselves from going crazy, and shoving down emotion is, it's bad. Emotion rebounds. So then people are trying to hold it together, and then, the cork comes off. So 10 years of that, I mean, that's what psychological torture does. It just causes disintegration of a person's identity, their personality, their functioning, so that they're, it would utterly break someone. 10 years. And it's not something that people can psychologically heal from. I mean, that level of abuse over that amount of time, being utterly helpless, abandoned by the world because you're thrown into a black hole. Often when people are traumatized, there'll be someone they can find somewhere they can talk to who'll understand. Well, there's no chance of that in Sam. So it's just beyond cruel. You guys were saying barbaric when you were talking about it. It really is. In fact, the UN rapporteur on torture, the previous one, Juan Mendez, said that it's not fitting of a civilized society to have procedures like that in place. I mean, and I agree with him. I don't think any society that calls itself a democracy or says that it respects human rights can continue to say that when that happens, under their own law, when that's permitted.
You're absolutely right. And to underscore that a little bit, we're gonna pull up another card about the SAMs. So if you could please do that, Sleepy Josh. And this says additional studies demonstrate that solitary confinement also causes severe psychological damage. Symptoms of that damage include anxiety, panic, rage, loss of control, paranoia, and hallucinations. Solitary can drive prisoners to self-mutilation. A 2014 study found that prisoners in solitary confinement in New York City jails were nearly 7 times more likely to harm themselves than those in general population. Rates of suicide among prisoners in solitary are up to 3 times higher than that of general population. These symptoms are widespread among prisoners under solitary confinement. In one study of pathology among solitary prisoners, every symptom of psychological distress measured was present in more than half the prisoners interviewed, and some symptoms were present in nearly all. There is not a single published study of solitary or supermax-like confinement in which non-voluntary confinement lasting for more than 10 days failed to result in negative psychological effects. These findings have prompted a nationwide movement to end solitary confinement, and they moved U.S. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy to declare in 2015 that, quote, research still confirms what the Supreme Court suggested over a century ago. Years on end of near total isolation exact a terrible price, unquote. Liz, if you could chime in and just kind of respond to that and give us your insight, and then we have about 5 or so minutes left with Lissa too. So if I could get Liz, then Lissa, and Lissa, if we could get your final thoughts and where people could find you, that would be excellent.
I apologize. Actually, you know what? I was listening, but let Lissa go first, just because I was on the other page trying to prep my little slideshow, and so yeah, why don't you go first, and then I can follow up, if that's okay. Are you there, Lissa?
Oh yes, sorry. Yes. Well, so my final thought about Sam's is that just the prospect of Sam's, being inflicted on Julian Assange in the US by itself is reason to deny the extradition request, because extraditions can't be granted when someone faces cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment in the US, and that's on the horizon. So that by itself is a reason that the extradition request should be dropped, which is something that the UN rapporteur has talked about, Nils Melzer. So, and, more urgently right now with COVID in Belmarsh prison, I mean, he needs to survive. He needs to survive his incarceration in Belmarsh. And that, Doctors for Assange are extremely worried about coronavirus being in Belmarsh, Julian Assange being in there, medically and psychologically vulnerable. So any pressure that can be brought to bear on elected officials, anybody you can write to urge Julian Assange, to be granted, urge authorities to grant him emergency bail in light of coronavirus. That's really important. In terms of finding me, probably New Matilda, newmatilda.com is an Australian independent news website that I write for. So there's a bunch of articles that I've written on Julian Assange there. And I'm on Twitter, although it depends how busy I am whether I tweet or not, but it's at Lissa K. Johnson with a double S. And there's the Doctors for Assange website, Doctors Assange, not Doctors for Assange, just doctorsassange.org. The doctor's letters and so on, and articles and things are on there.
Okay. So I guess I'll follow up. Thank you, Lissa.
Thank you.
So I don't know. When we're going over the whole SAMS thing, I get so angry and I'm frustrated because I'm not from England and I don't understand always, I wish I could just teleport there and understand all of the laws and do whatever I could just right at that edge without breaking the law, but do some really intense actions to wake people up. I really would like to go with a bullhorn and go wake up that judge. I'm really angry, but I think that's illegal, so don't do that. And I have these kind of desperate thoughts that are what, can't we hold these people accountable? Can't we go to international criminal courts and literally take them to The Hague and say, this is torture. This is literally torture. And, this judge needs to be removed. These people need to be go on offense, not defense. I guess maybe that would take a lot of time and Julian's life is hanging in the balance. So it's not practical, But these are sort of the instinctive thoughts that I have, that like, how the hell are these people getting away with this? What is the most intense action that we can take without breaking the law, going to jail, harming people, etc., but waking everyone up? How can I learn the laws over in England fast enough to help? And what can I do here in America to help? These are just the thoughts that run through my head after reviewing that. It's horrific what they're doing to him. That's why my only desperate thought is just education, education, education. And that's why I think there's a real disconnect with people. I think that people just don't know his story. And when they know his story, they just know the talking points from the horrible media, as we all know. And they don't understand that he was targeted. Like, we are looking at a man whose entire persecution is a reflection of these targeting programs that they are putting people into. And, you know, depending on how much you're considered a threat to the establishment. And it has nothing to do with him actually doing anything wrong. It's about persecuting truth tellers. And we really have to drive that point home over and over again. And the only way that I think people are going to really take it seriously is to really hammer the leaked documents, which I'll show, that I think we've seen on the WikiLeaks website, and we've seen on my pages, and before it'll be a review. But I mean, there's some really damning evidence in the WikiLeaks documents themselves about how these agencies are framing him. So that has
John
to
Kiriakou actually laid it out really, really well when he talked about how these entire court proceedings are built to go. And that it's not about justice, it's not about truth, it's about damage mitigation and keeping secrets secret. And that's what this entire SAMS process feels like to me, on top of all of the torture and all of the other horrendous things built in there, to the point that by threat of government intervention, you can't have an open conversation with a family member that is built in there. So it just drives it so far that they don't want any bit of this information getting out. And with the targeting, Susie Dawson actually did a beautiful job in the Freeing Julian Assange Part 3 that we always refer back to here, the article that she wrote about how they literally work in their process of escalation for targeting people to make them understand who's in charge, but also at the same time to make sure that there is the misinformation and the disinformation and the infiltration that goes on to help break the public's thought and make them think that what is right is actually wrong. So if we could hop back into the next SAMS tile, because this kind of gives examples of correctional officers that had to enforce SAMS and just what their experiences were and what they had to say about it. Yes, the senior correction officials have recognized the harmful effects of solitary confinement and called for reform. After spending just 20 hours in solitary confinement, the head of Colorado's Department of Corrections observed that maintaining his sanity would be a battle he would lose. New York's corrections commissioner found that solitary confinement at Rikers Island led to increased violence and that the program in general seemed to defy logic. Mississippi's former commissioner of corrections publicly criticized that the state's widespread use of solitary, if you treat people like animals, that's exactly how they'll behave. A former warden at ADX described the prison he ran. This place is not designed for humanity. It's not designed for rehabilitation. And that really just puts the context of this, that it's that weird study that came out of some college that says if you put people in charge of something and let them do what they will and then make it escalatingly more terrible, that they'd be willing to do it. And it's it's fucked up that it has to happen and is happening to Julian. But the more important thing is that this isn't a rare case, the way that he's being treated. This is, for many people, commonplace within the United States. And it's something that he himself had revealed through the Guantanamo Bay files and the program manuals.
Yeah, I mean, how sick is it that he gave us the proof about targeting programs, and then they thought, hey, we're gonna ruin your life with a targeting program because, you know, we don't want anyone to know about the targeting programs. I mean, they just proved him right all over the place. They proved how vital the information was to get out there, because, I mean, look at the lengths they're going to try to harm an innocent person. So yeah, we have to I mean, I love everyone here and I love our group, and I think we're always, you know, doing a great job, but I always just think we've got to pierce this mainstream, because they've really limited us with social media and the algorithms. I mean, I even found out, you saw today, Steve and everyone, that you know, my Twitter was getting deep boosted, like they're doing all the shadow banning, and I think they're really just trying to corral us so that we're always preaching to the choir, which is sad. And there are people that are doing such amazing work, and every day going out there and doing amazing actions. But we've got to bring it to the people that are watching, you know, Kim Kardashian's ass all day. You know what I mean? Like, sorry, but, you know, people that are watching like this mindless television, we have to get them to stop looking at this garbage and look at these issues that are related to their human rights and our U.S. Constitution ultimately, and global, global human rights.
Well, the hope for Action for Assange originally forming was the idea of making activism commonplace to the normal person.
Mm-hmm.
So taking a banner and one or two people going out on their own and putting 6 of them up down multiple highways breaks the monotone nature of American existence. So it's putting the things that people actively ignore right back in front of them. Like if you do it in an artful way, so you have one that says "Free Julian Assange," don't jail journalists, and then no more torture, spread out down the same length of highway. As people go, they'll be able to assimilate your message from literally tweets. So the hope was in reaching people, and it's happened with our New York group. We have a group in North Carolina that does awesome. The group in Denver, there's the Bay Assange group, and multiple others throughout the country that take the time to do this, because it takes about an hour to hang 100 posters on telephone poles. So that's really what I've always tried to encourage people to do, because that's just a start. That starts to remove that layer of desensitization of injustice that Julian talks about. So the hope is to get people doing a little thing, so that way they then continue to find more and more ways to do nonviolent but information spreading actions.
Well, actually, can I ask Liz? Like, I remember, so when you started your TPP group, that was kind of by accident for you, wasn't it? Like, that was like a Facebook post or something that like went crazy viral and you just ran with it. Like, people don't understand that like these little acts of activism can turn into something that's so, you know, that can really make a difference. And isn't that kind of how that group got started?
Yeah. And I wanted to say, when you were talking, I feel bad. I hope that I didn't come off sounding like I wasn't appreciating what everyone's doing. I think this group is amazing, and I think everyone's doing amazing work and raising awareness. I think it's exactly because of what you brought up. It's because when I did my Stop TPP group, I started out with a Facebook event, and what happened was my group grew in the first year to about somewhere between 10 and 15,000. But this was like over 5-year battle. And what they did is, right before the fast track vote, they started just slamming us with the algorithm changes. And so all of these methods that I had come up with were suddenly kind of neutralized. And so I guess I'm just frustrated because for me, that's how I grew my group, was using social media completely. And so yeah, I think I'm just trying to, what everyone is doing right now is amazing. I just wish we can merge more of like these people that are going out there and putting all this time and energy and doing these beautiful actions and reaching people on the streets, and somehow getting around these algorithms that have, sequestered us off into the corner. I mean, we were able to always like, trend with our hashtags, and also we were able to hijack other people's hashtags and trend there. And now they've done weird things even with Twitter, where when I go to look to see what's trending, they'll just tell me in my little local area. It's no longer national. And then on Facebook, it's just useless. I mean, it's weird because I've started other, like when they were doing the NAFTA renegotiation, I started a page called NAFTA Hates You. And I swear to God, I've got like under 100 people. And I used all the same methods. So how come, I used one set of methods with social media 5 or 6 years ago, and I was able to get 15,000 people involved. And now I can barely get 100. So I think that's where that frustration comes from. It's not to criticize anybody else. It's just my own personal frustration where I'm like, damn, I was able to reach all these people before. How can we break out of this box?
I think your work with TPP is a great example of like how the world can be changed, because ultimately that's one of the things that Donald Trump, for better or worse, was forced to do, was reject TPP early on because of pressure that you and others had built around getting it stopped. And that's why they changed the algorithms, because they're fucking assholes and they don't want us to be able to find ways through their systems. But there's always another like chink in the armor or way that the algorithm could be exploited. Because for a long time it was live streams. That was what the algorithms prioritized. So if you were like sneaking in doing live streams at times that other people weren't, they would give you more promotion, even in the censored bubble that you were in, because it was a live stream and kept people glued to their platforms. So there's always something. Lately, for me, it's been posting on promotional tweets on Twitter and promotional ads on Facebook that you see, because people pay for those comments. So as you're going through, if you drop a comment about Julian Assange or about someone that had their Twitter account removed, it's a lot more impactful, because then the people that are paying for that comment then get basically charged by Twitter to carry it around the internet for you. So it's that's just a little thing that I figured out recently that I've been trying to use to help people get accounts back and things.
Nice. I love it. Well, I think we should have brainstorming sessions for things exactly like that, and just come up with all the new, workaround techniques.
Well, we're actually getting ready to do the teach-ins. When do those start, guys? Steve, when do the teach-ins start?
Well,
we have the first one written. So the first.
We've got it. We just need to get Taylor to do some voiceovers, and we need to actually script we need to read our parts and shoot our parts, and then it's done. And we can release it. If we get on it and we get Taylor on it, then we could probably have it handled this weekend and drop it either right before or right after the Tuesday vigil. Man, I love being put on the spot.
Right.
One of my favorite things.
Well, I'll recommend. Can I recommend something? I'll jump in.
Yeah.
Well, it's just what I said before. But please, somebody show me how to do the. I need somebody who's over in England or wherever they're doing all the projection bombing. I need someone to teach me how to do that. I really want to learn.
Got a guy for you.
Do you?
Our buddy Drufus, who was with us in DC, has the skill and know-how to do that, and he's you know, I don't know about travel restrictions on the East Coast, but he is much closer to where you are than any of us.
Yeah, I just need a cheap budget, and I don't know. I'll figure out a way. I'm going to try to ask some friends around and see if they can help. But yeah, okay. Okay, we'll talk about that afterwards. But thank you.
And if
So
you
do-
want to go ahead and get into the material that you have prepared, Liz, that would be pretty much right on at this point.
Okay. Well, let's see. I was like making this slideshow, and it's still in its like rough draft phase. And I've posted most of these, and I know WikiLeaks has, and again, it's a review, but every now and then I wonder if I'm going to find, sorry, I'm like looking for my glasses. What did I do with them? Every now and then I wonder if I find something like extra or new. But I don't want to like, I don't know, it could be kind of long and tedious, but, and also I've got to figure out how to screen share. Why can't I screen share, you guys? Why is it so hard? Okay, I'm switching between screens. So is there anything else anybody wanted to say before I sort of start babbling and launching into this? Because
please go as deep as you want into it. We love things like this that explore the leaks, because it's something that it's hard to find information about old leaks now without just getting into them yourself.
Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm putting this up here. Can you see this? Did I do this right? Do you see this? Or do you not? Damn, guys. All right, let's do a teaching for Liz to figure out how the hell to use one button to do share screen. Let's see. Share screen? I thought I did it. There's something. Okay, let's see. Enter your screen. Share. It's not that hard.
We're doing it live.
To quote Jason Burmis.
Oh,
he may jump in. I know. Share. I just wanted to be able to throw it out that he may get in. I sent him a message because he's usually here with us around this time.
Okay, I'm trying again. And then I got to find my glasses to actually read the fine print. It's not going to be fun. Where the hell are those? Okay. Do you see my screen at all?
Yeah, we see Andrew.
Yeah, I see me.
Okay. Now I got to find my... I've got to find the slides. Where did I put them? I've got too many things open. That's the problem. All right, you guys talk amongst yourselves while I find it. No, that's the wrong one. Oh my God.
We're good.
I'm having a panic attack.
Oh, you're fine. Don't worry.
Okay. Oh, wait. Here we go. This looks like it could be it. Okay, you guys talk for a minute. I have to look for my glasses. I think they fell.
Okay.
I'll be right back.
So I'm going to drop the link in chat again during our preparation moment here for the different actions that people can take. And again, for anyone that's just checking this out, this is the multiple senators that signed a letter asking Lenin Moreno to remove Julian Assange's asylum, as well as multiple petitions, including a ban on facial recognition, Tim Canova's paper ballot petition, and a few others. And I'm going to try to find more petitions to get put in there for everyone. And if you've already signed them, please share the links out for others to sign. But also there's a couple people that are good friends of the show that do need support. And they all have GoFundMe's up. One of them is Jason Burmis. He's been a great friend of the show for a long time now. He's a great truth teller. He was the guy that originally made Loose Change. He has a GoFundMe set up, as well as Susie Dawson. She's a columnist and journalist out of New Zealand that became targeted and ended up having to flee trying to receive political asylum in Russia. And then there's a couple other people out there. One of them in particular, if you go on to Chelsea Manning's page, she has a donation link that's up for people to help donate to cover her living expenses as well. But you can always go to Courage Foundation and donate, because right now Action for Assange has no donations and no goals or anything we're trying to reach to right now. because it doesn't look like the May 18th date's going to be able to happen here in the U.S. for getting a protest together. So, yeah, if you could support them, that would be great.
Can we also remind people too that something else that they can do is to talk to their favorite content creators, like get at them on Twitter and in their comment section on their YouTube channel and ask them politely or whatever, because like Andrew said earlier, we can't control you if you're not polite, and I'm kind of an asshole sometimes, so I get it. But yeah, if we can just get at our content creators and ask them politely to cover Assange, that's something huge. I mean, if we could just get independent media to talk about it, you'd think they'd be talking about it, right? They're not. They're not really. Like Jimmy Dore is, and you guys are, and Slow News Day does, and you know what I mean? Like it's insane to me that more people in independent left media are not talking about it. It's crazy.
We can see your Discord, Liz.
Sorry.
That's all right. I just proof that I send polite and professional messages.
I'm so sorry.
Who would have thought it?
Okay, I'm ready. I'm ready with my really primitive tech skills. Okay, so I've shown this a million times, but I want everyone to see this. This was in the Stratfor files, the global intelligence files. They were leaked, and it shows that Stratfor thought that Julian Assange was being honey trapped by the government, and they were basically excited and happy that the government probably, as they say, this is a quote, "Now would we pay a couple of hoochies to have sex with him and then get him into legal trouble, for which, by the way, he is rightfully under threat of extradition? Will we do that? Hell yes." And then they say, well, the Kremlin would kill him. The US just set a honey trap and he flew in like a dumbass. So this goes all the way back to when he was being framed for rape. And this is what kicked off, the majority of the years that he spent in the embassy. And, I think when we're educating the public, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to, I don't know how Mrs. Assange would want this. Like, maybe some people just don't even want to deal with this because it was such a ridiculous farce. It's like, why remind people even that this happened? But I think it's important to remind people that Julian Assange was being targeted for years. And, Stratfor is a government subcontractor. And they were hired to be part of the project of attacking not only WikiLeaks, but WikiLeaks supporters like us. So I think people need to recognize the signs of these targeting programs. But anyway, I think this is pretty damning. And I hope that they show this when they take, like if he goes to court. I mean, just the levels. But I mean, other things since then have come out that are so horrific that I guess they eclipse that. This just shows, this is actually from IC Watch. And I think I may have shown this before in my other presentation, but it just shows you again that, yes, indeed, the government, like, because you'll hear people say, oh, would the government really pay people like prostitutes to set people up? Well, as a matter of fact, they will, and they call them role players. And here's an instructor that seems to be conducting classes on honeypots. So I thought this was, this is a CV that was listed on LinkedIn, and IC Watch is a collection of CVs that this young gentleman collected, and actually ended up getting death threats for collecting. I mean, this is like public knowledge that these security contractors put up on LinkedIn, and this young man was just intelligent enough to gather them so that we would have evidence of what these people were bragging about in their CVs. And then they turned around, these security contractors started giving the gentleman that put together IC Watch death threats. And so I think he even had to end up fleeing the country. I think he went to Germany, and WikiLeaks took over and actually kept the, all preserved his work. And there may have been other people, I think, involved. But anyway, So yeah, but I mean, the main point is I just want people to know, yes, they have honeypot schools.
It's crazy how far they go with that too, because
Yeah.
they'll have every age group, they'll have your full profile for who you are and what you would fall for, and hand pick that like perfect person to go after you. So it's absolutely insane.
It's sickening. I've actually personally found one of my former fiance's email in the global intelligence files, and he had connections to Stratfor, and he ran off under very peculiar circumstances. So it's been traumatizing for me to, even on just that level, possibly experiencing that. And when I get into these slides, I'm going to review again just how many other people who are just WikiLeaks supporters. I mean, I'm not part of WikiLeaks at all. I think my tech skills give it away that I'm definitely not. I'm not worthy to be part of WikiLeaks. I wish I were. But anyway, but the fact of the matter is that all these people who even are just fans of WikiLeaks are getting attacked on multiple levels now. But moving right along, I wanted to point out just again how the banks, I mean, when I talk about targeting programs, one of the first things that they'll do when they target you is go after your finances. They will hit you from every side. They will dig up old debt. They'll find IRS debt. They'll give you inflated bills through your utilities, like if you're an average person. They will send surveillance role players in and attack your work. They will file false report after false report after false report until you get fired. Then the government will deny your unemployment. In fact, I'm kind of wrestling with part of that right now, personally. But anyway, just going back years before Julian Assange, I think this is before he got arrested, maybe right around the time, and maybe right after, right before, but the banks conspired just to block his revenue. I mean, what right do these people have to do that? You know, I mean, oh, we don't like you, we're going to just block your ability to make money. I don't know how this can be legal. So I just wanted to show that. Next thing, sorry, I should maybe move through this quickly. Stop me at any time if I'm...
Oh, please, no, please take... I think
okay.
we're fine on time.
Okay, just let me know. Let's see, the persecution of journalist Julian Assange. I just have to see what I put here. Oh, so this is Stratfor talking about how, you know, there's a leak-focused gravy train, and they're like looking for ways to get subcontracting work. It's like, you know, in one sense, they're acting like they hate Julian Assange so much, but then it's because of targets like Julian Assange and targets like us that these people even are employed, you know, so they get all excited. They're like, ooh, more people to torture. I can't wait. It'll, you know, cha-ching, it'll end up filling my bank account with money. So I thought that was interesting to note. Here's something else. Let's see, prevention boiled down to cohesive team. Okay, so they were talking about even like having issues with, I have to reorient myself. Let's see. I believe this was about, I think just about how the best way to keep people from leaking information is to limit the material of who gets to see it, and then only the people who feel enfranchised, who are basically financially enriched usually, should have access to the information, which is what we're seeing, you know, maybe in a microcosm with all these security agencies, like the lower level trash bag, average subcontractor. But then, you know, they're doing this all the way up to the largest agencies out there, like the CIA and so forth. I mean, it's become that classified documents are just so that the elite, or whoever the elite are considered in the group, can hide their dirty work. And, you know, and if they are enriched by this, by hiding these secrets, then they should be the only ones who have access, and everyone else should be limited. And that's how they're going to prevent leaks in the future. Let's see. Most possible, my eyes are bad. What am I putting here? Let's see, to enfranchise your entire bureaucracy. Again, it's just talking about controlling information and who has access. It's basically what I was just talking about before. So what is this one? I loved this where they were like mocking, this is Stratfor again, subcontractors are mocking Assange for advocating for workers. And they say, treat your employees well, great point. Problem is it doesn't sell. And it just shows over and over again how these people just really care about money and the bottom line. They have no moral compass whatsoever. It doesn't matter if they see Julian Assange as a good person, they're still going to ruin his life anyway. So the next one is Stratfor discussing harming Julian Assange and anyone who supports Julian Assange. And this is what we were talking about before. I know this was part, like WikiLeaks has tweeted this multiple times. I've tweeted this multiple times. I'm sure many people have. But this really talks about how, again, it's not just Julian Assange. And this is the point we have to drive home to the public, is that these targeting programs are impacting everyone in WikiLeaks, all the fans, independent journalists, but it's getting to the point where, like Susie Dawson has described and I've described, it's going to earthquake victims and rape victims and people who go up against Monsanto. And maybe you've got a neighbor who was in the military and he doesn't like your face and now he put you on a list. I mean, it's getting to the point where everybody is, there's a financial incentive to create targets, and then there's also the in crowd. It's like the group that has access can just go and bully people whenever they feel like it. But anyway, this particular leak is just talking about how Stratfor was listing. It says ferreting out his Confederates is also key. Find out what other disgruntled rogues inside the tent or outside. Pile on. Move him from country to country to face various charges for the next 25 years, but seize everything he and his family own to include every person linked to Wiki. So that is very, I can't even find the words without screaming a set of obscenities, like how horrible this is. And I'm particularly disgusted by what they've done to Julian Assange, because this is like before, they're just looking to pick on him. But it also, it hits home to me because my family has lost practically every single asset they ever had in the last couple of years. Now, was it directly related to being a fan of WikiLeaks? Was it because of my Stop TPP work? Could it have been, maybe something else? There's another situation in my family that I question. But I mean, all it amounts to is that people who are in high positions of power and have access to these government databases and government subcontractors and the money to hire them are, creating harassment. I mean, they can just go and harass people and threaten them and just steal their money. And these people haven't broken any laws. At least they haven't been proven to break any law. I mean, the people that they're targeting. So what the hell? How can they get away with this? Okay. Do you want me to keep going?
Well, that's why I think it's so important that normal, average, everyday people just start taking personal street action.
Yeah.
Because it creates this surface area, essentially, where if they have already made the decision to go after supporters of WikiLeaks, not even just the people at WikiLeaks. So getting more and more and more individuals out and acting and using multiple forms of encryption creates this, larger surface. So if they choose to continue that, they have to then take resources and people away from other individuals, which could create more of an opening. So I think that it's something that with this information, we have more of a chance to create an impact, not to stop it, but to be able to funnel the way that it's used. Because it's not just WikiLeaks either. It's probably any activist organization across the country.
Yeah.
Susie Dawson has proof that you can be targeted for asking questions about your insurance company.
Right. Yep, that was what they found with Thompson and Clark, the group that was also targeting actually Stop TPP activists. This particular subcontractor, I think they're mainly in New Zealand, but they always have connections internationally. So, who is their sister or brother organization in the other country that was probably nailing me at the same time? it's just horrible that Thompson and Clark was going after Susie because she was part of the Occupy movement originally. They went after Stop TPP activists, and they also went after like the MANA group, the Internet Party, and which I think is like an indigenous like group over in New Zealand. And they also went after earthquake victims, like people who are victims of, filing claims. It was like, oh, okay, we don't want to pay this money out to people that have lost everything in an earthquake. How can we smear them? And I mean, this is serious criminal activity. This is exactly what like mobsters do. This is what the mafia does.
Well, and I think, guys, this is actually something we need to focus on when we talk to people, because I think this is something that gets overlooked a lot in this discussion is, yes, this is happening to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, but this is coming for all of us. Like, that's how it goes. It starts with him, and they've done a really good job over the past decade of demonizing him and making him an easy target that everybody, they've kind of made him this ambiguous figure that everybody kind of has a bad feeling about. And so people kind of cheer it on, and he's pissed off everybody. I mean, he pissed off, the right-wing people when he printed the Iraq and Afghanistan war logs. And then he pissed off the Democrats when he and that's because he has integrity, but he has enemies across the board. And I think we need to make it known to people that this is coming for all of us. It always does. They're going to start with him, and this is what manufactures the consent for it to trickle down. It's not good.
Absolutely.
And let's be perfectly clear about what this organization is and does. Their job is to break people.
Yep.
Their job is to take as much as they can, regardless of law, because there is no law. The only consequences they face is when they don't do a good enough job of breaking a person and taking as much from them as humanly possible. And people will say like, yeah, well, they're, a private company or whatever, they're above the law, nobody can do anything about it. Because you're not fucking telling your friends and loved ones and strangers about it. You're not spreading this information around as much as humanly possible, because if we all know, we're going to want to fucking do something about it.
Yeah. I mean, well, we can't accuse me of not spreading it around because I scream it every day.
I wasn't talking about you.
I know. I'm just kidding.
Shouting into the void here right now.
No, I totally, no, I'm sorry. I was just making a joke, but you're right. You're right. Like if we, yes, this is what I want. I think if we did flyers, we should just do flyers with leaks like this, like a whole series of them. You know what I mean?
I'm for it.
And get the word out, because they really do. They ruin people's lives. I think many of us are living this right now, and it's sickening. And then I'm sorry, do you mind if I switch screens? I was going to show you another thing.
Oh no, please do.
Yeah, no, that we got about 10 more minutes before we have to show an article and then wrap up. So
okay, I'll try to breeze some of these. And some of this you've seen before, and I've presented before, and other people have presented multiple times. But Julian Assange is not the first person to have been accused of sex crimes, falsely accused of sex crimes. Poor Jacob Appelbaum was, basically accused of all of these horrible things, and so was Trevor Fitzgibbon. And Trevor, good for him. He took one of the people that was accusing him falsely of rape, and he won his court cases. But that takes a lot of time, a lot of money. It takes a toll on your whole life, and you have to devote your whole life single-mindedly to going after these people. And they win either way, because they exhaust you. And I wanted to show that, and that's just a good chart that demonstrates that again. Let's see if I can get down to more of these slides, get through them really quickly. Sorry. This one, Susie Dawson, again, she was, what they tend to do with the men is call them rapists or pedophiles. But what they do with the women, like Susie or with me, is they will, like what you were saying earlier, I think it was you, Steve, or maybe it was you, Andrew. I can't remember. It
was the guy with the mustache and the beard.
sorry, no. Who's, somebody was saying earlier today that they really, they study you. They study you through all of your electronic information. So they'll go back, and I mean, I remember with the guy that I end up almost marrying, who was linked to Stratfor. I thought it was so weird when we went on a date, because he was like, he had every single thing in common with me, but in common with like someone who, like my younger version, like all this music that I used to listen to, but I don't listen to anymore. And it was really obvious because there was just a short period of time I wasn't really on the computer a lot, and there were some times that I used like I learned how to use email, and I was communicating with people that I traveled with and stuff. And it was almost like he had lifted all these scripts from like my emails and was like, oh, I really love Led Zeppelin. And it's like, Jesus, I haven't listened to that group since like it became nauseating on mainstream, whatever, radio. But anyway, so they study you, and they will show up, and they will try to be your perfect Prince Charming, Anyway, it's sickening what these people do, because even like with activists in the UK, some of these people that were undercover informants were even like getting women pregnant, and spent 4 years with people and wasted their lives in fertility and all this shit. So anyway, all right, I won't dwell on that because we've already talked about this before. And then I wanted to talk about people, still the mysteries that surround WikiLeaks. I mean, did Aaron Swartz kill himself, or was he just made to look depressed and then somebody else hung him? I mean, these are questions that I have in my mind. Now, I don't want to start conspiracy theories or whatever, but I just want to point out that it's very interesting that targets end up either killing themselves or mysteriously dying. And look at these two guys, both worked on Secure Drop, which was a way for whistleblowers in the beginning to get information to WikiLeaks anonymously, and 2 out of 3 of the people I think that worked on this ended up hanging themselves mysteriously. And these people don't strike me as the kind of people that would just feel sad, and I guess maybe people can be worked into a depression, but these people seem like fighters. I just have a hard time believing that 2 people out of 3 just randomly hung themselves. It's disturbing. And then I never knew, I haven't followed up on the story. I don't know if you guys have any information, but whatever happened to that one man that went, what was it? Not canoeing, but he went kayaking. I mean, there are a lot of people that have died or have gone missing or have committed suicide around WikiLeaks. And it's disturbing. It's disturbing to know that these people were government targets, and people are ending up dead. So, and then we've got the case of, a prominent WikiLeaks supporter getting attacked in all of these other ways where I could go on forever about Kim.com's case, but basically they're attacking Kim.com, trying to extradite him, and they already stole, I think, all of his resources. He got some back from Hong Kong, but they basically are trying to extradite Kim.com for copyright law, which is not even a criminal offense in either New Zealand or in the US. Should I keep going? Sorry. Are you guys still there?
Yeah, you got 5 more minutes.
Okay.
And look, I want to say real quick, like, just personally, there is no doubt in my mind that Aaron Swartz did not kill himself.
Mm-hmm. I went to Aaron Swartz like hackathon, and there were all these people that knew him back in the day, and they took the stage, and a lot of people that knew him from when he was a child were like, they couldn't believe it either. But I mean, again, that's speculative, and so I'm trying to.
That's pure speculation, but
that's I mean, I'm with you.
I'm with you.
I'm with you completely. Do you want me to keep going, or should I? Let's see. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
No, you're fine. Okay. You have a couple minutes still.
Okay. CIA Stratfor discusses how Julian Assange will be raped in prison. Well, that's nice. So these people are sitting here terrorizing this guy, chasing him from country to country, stealing his money, framing him for rape, you know, giving him death threats. People around him are dropping like flies with mysterious deaths. And then they're so angry. They're like, oh yeah, and by the way, we can't wait till you get raped in prison. That's really professional. I'm really glad that we have security agencies in, you know, national security talking about how they can't wait till people get raped in prison. Stratford ridicules Julian Assange for being super paranoid. And that's, again, I mean, how sick are these psychopaths? I mean, they're the ones that are stalking him and attacking him and making him terrified. And then they're like, you know, he's sounded super paranoid. Well, who the hell wouldn't be if they're being, you know, followed and persecuted? Let's see, next. Stratford derides Julian Assange for believing in the truth. I found this really offensive because, once again, they know Julian Assange is a truth teller and they don't care. They're still willing to ruin his life. Let's see, CIA Stratford states Julian Assange needs a stable relationship because supposedly anyone who's married knows the enormous benefits of lying. Well, there's a really wonderful character, you know, reveal of the kind of people that work in these agencies. I mean, they think everything is based on lying, including their most personal love relationships. It's disgusting. CIA Stratford claims diplomacy and intelligence work are crafts of manipulating and alleviating the constraints of geopolitics. So everything to them is just something to be exploited and manipulated. And they always put it in sort of this sterile language in terms of, oh, we need to do it for geopolitics. But no, you don't need to do it. You could actually be an ethical, moral, like decent human being, but and still do your job. You know, do your job of national security, but don't frame people for crimes they didn't commit. But they don't see it that way. Steer clear of Julian Assange's moralizing game. Again, these people have no moral compass, and they're attacking Julian for having one. And then I start to get into all the slides that I hadn't, you know, let's see, gotten to yet. Pursue conspiracy, political terrorism, and declassify the death of a source, someone which could link to Wiki. Now, I still was trying to figure that one out. Pursue the conspiracy. I mean, basically, they're the ones who are doing conspiracy, like conspiracy and political terrorism. I mean, our security agencies are the ones who are guilty of that, but they want to pin that on Assange. And then there's something about declassify the death of a source, someone which could link to Wiki. I don't know to what they were referring exactly, and I need to go back and do more research on that. Today, let's see. This, I know WikiLeaks has covered this definitely, but it just shows that they were smearing, you know, one thing I found that was really interesting is in the beginning, all the documents refer to Julian Assange as a liberal, and he's, you know, they say it very, like as an insult. And they're like, you know, that's what you get for the liberal, whatever, and there's whatever, they constantly are insulting him. But then today, when it's convenient for them, they're calling him right-wing, and they're calling him a Russian agent. But they leave out completely that, you know, the former, like, that basically Julian Assange was revealing a lot of leaked like information out of Russia. You know, like he didn't play favorites. And I don't know. Let me see if this is BBC CIA Stratford. How his long history of exposing oppressive regimes. There it is. You know, he Stratford knows that Julian Assange was also exposing Russia. So, you know, this idea of, oh, he's only favoring, you know, Russian interests is bullshit. And just rounding up, I think this overlaps. This is the last slide that I have, but there's more, but I'll put it in later in another presentation. But this is just, again, talking about Palantir. And Palantir and Gary and Stratford were the groups that were, I guess, gathering intelligence on WikiLeaks and WikiLeaks followers and, you know, people or supporters. And just even Stratford, which has no moral compass, which we've just read their, you know, their comments that prove that, are talking about Palantir and how they're like a step even lower. And that probably the founder of Palantir is probably, it's in quotes, probably fucking nuts. And you did a wonderful presentation, Steve, on that. Thank you for covering that. And then I was just going to leave everyone with the thought of, once again, Palantir, the same group that Straffer thinks has a founder who's fucking nuts, is going to be also conducting medical surveillance over in the UK and probably for Five Eye agencies, which will impact our lives. So I'm really glad that these terrorist murderers are, going to be doing our medical surveillance for coronavirus. So sorry, this is not an upbeat, uplifting presentation, you guys. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, no, I think it takes the veil off of it and it makes it as unpleasant as it is, but gives that information in a way that people can actually see it. Because they could literally take any one of those words you have in quotes throughout all of that, throw it into the search engine in WikiLeaks and pull those articles up. So I really appreciate you putting this together and coming on here to talk about it, because it will hopefully go a long way to getting others to cover and talk about these same kind of stories.
Thanks. Oh, I'm so sorry. Can I just show you one last thing? I didn't get it into my slide, but it's something you guys have all seen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Can you put something else up, because I have to look through my stuff for 1 second?
Yeah. We can. Do you want to pull up the Reality Winner article, Josh?
You can take it off. You have to take it off of share screen for us to show the article. But while we're doing that, you can pull up the slide you're looking for, or the thing you're looking for.
Are you?
Yeah, we got it.
Just give me 1 second. I think I just want to make sure I've got it. It's on my Facebook. Damn it. Sorry.
Yeah. Do you want to jump into this real quick, Steve?
Oh, that's wild. So we've got the Reality Winner article up. Okay, yes, I will do that. Federal prosecutors are fighting efforts to release Reality Winner, a former National Security Agency contractor, from a prison where inmates have contracted COVID-19. Bobby Christine, U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Georgia, argued against commuting the remaining 19 months of the sentence for Winner, who was convicted for tipping media about Russian efforts to hack the 2016 election. Christine argued that District Chief Randall Hall has no jurisdiction to consider the motion because Winner has not yet exhausted administrative remedies within the U.S. Bureau of Prisons. That is a bunch of mealy-mouthed garbage for we're purposefully screwing this woman over. Prosecutors also argued that 30 days have not elapsed since Winner's first requested release to home confinement after two fellow inmates at Federal Medical Center Carswell in Fort Worth, Texas, contracted the virus. Winner filed a request April 8th, but prosecutors insisted the prison social worker responsible for reviewing compassionate release requests has not yet received it. Jesus. Because Winner, quote, because Winner has not demonstrated how COVID-19 specifically affects her, apart from pure speculation, nor shown that the Bureau of Prisons plan is inadequate, nor established that Carswell FMC is unable to adequately treat her, her request for compassionate release based on COVID-19 fails, end quote. Christine, in a brief signed by U.S. Assistant Attorneys Jennifer Solari and Justin Davids. Wow, that's harsh. BOP has also informed the government that two individuals at Carswell that tested positive had been purposely transferred to the facility and immediately quarantined. They were never in general population. If it's an airborne virus, if it's aerosolized, it doesn't matter, especially if it can stay on surfaces for anywhere from 2 hours to 30 freaking months, like the fear porn says.
So after going through all that stuff with Liz, and I don't know if she's still with us. I don't know if she disconnected. I think her laptop was almost dead. But that line there, right? The BOP has informed the government that two individuals at Carswell FMC tested positive had been purposefully transferred to the facility and immediately quarantined. If that's not a better way to fuck with someone that fucked with the national intelligence state and revealed classified information, I don't know what is. Transferring someone to their prison facility that is known to have this virus and then rejecting their bail, saying, no, you didn't argue good enough about what this virus is and how it's going to affect you, when you literally hear it screamed on the media, on the propaganda machines all day about it. So it's crazy to see them even admit to something like this.
Look, they clearly don't give a damn. They clearly don't think anybody's paying attention. And they've done a pretty successful job of never talking about reality winner. So it doesn't even register in the public's consciousness at large if a news article were to slide by like this, where she's been denied compassionate release. We're at the point now with our prison system that if it's not glaringly obvious that this is punitive, I don't know what to tell you, because they have let out the worst possible people under this COVID thing, and that's not changing anytime soon. They've let out pedophiles, they've let out rapists, they've let out people who have manslaughter charges. But an NSA analyst who copied some files and gave them to The Intercept is not up for this. A publisher is not up for this. There are so many things that should just be, as Helen Beniski puts it, raising a forest of red flags. And it's our job to make sure that we proliferate this information. And it's your job in the audience to proliferate this information. And look, if you don't think you're on a list, just by virtue of being in the chat right now or watching this presentation when it's not live, every website you've been to that could be deemed seditious in nature or even questionable in nature, you're on a list. Like, this is already affecting you. And
I would recommend, to point that out the most to the common person, look up the continuity of government and main core programs. That it's literally a list that's legal to maintain of every activist, protester, conscientious objector, and person who may at one point choose to interfere.
Sorry,
And
Lissa, you've been here the whole time, and we didn't know. But if you want to weigh in on anything at any point, please do.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been fascinating. It's some similar stuff that Elizabeth and Susie Dawson and I talked about over about 8 hours. But it kind of leaves you speechless, doesn't it, the stuff that Elizabeth is going through. Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about it linked back to psychological torture as well. But of course, Julian Assange knows all this in great detail. So he knows the mindset that he's up against. He knows the kinds of things people have been saying about him. He knows it'll probably be even worse for him under special administrative measures than we know. I mean, so it just makes his current situation even more horrific for him.
I was going to say, I found the last thing I was going to leave you guys with, if you want to see it, but I don't want to.
Yeah, no, if you could.
Let's see. Okay, now I got to get back to, oh gosh, then I interrupted. I'm so sorry. I'm not prepared.
No, you're fine.
I'm just trying to find okay, so I've got to first come to this screen and then do share screen, and then it's going to pop up everything on my screen. Here we go. Let's see, share. Come on. It's not clicking. I can see it says enter entire screen. Yes, share. Okay, do you see my screen? Do you see? There's an echo. Do you see my screen?
No, we can't see it. It didn't pull up.
Damn. Okay, let's try this again.
You might have a YouTube page open with the show on it, and that's what's echoing. Maybe not. I don't know. No, because it's on a delay. Never mind. I'll shut up.
No, I probably do. Let me figure out where that is. Damn it. Yeah,
I think Josh fixed it.
Down. Okay. Sorry.
Okay, you're still in. You still have a window open. Yeah. Doing it live. We didn't even write it. To anyone who would dare say that any of this is scripted. Like, that is an insult to our ability to improv. I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, this is 100% jazz. It really is. Or if you prefer 100% drums, space, drums, morning dew. Like, find a genre and put a jam band in it. That's what we're doing here. It's well, actually, no. I mean, we prepare the material and we talk about it, and sometimes we curse at each other over it. But other than that, you know, once we get here, it's live. Yeah, while we're doing this, Lissa, please share your thoughts with what's transpired in the last little bit. And it really, man, like the shit that they put Liz through is just disgusting.
Yeah, it's horrendous. I mean, it's so far away from what most people think goes on that it's kind of difficult, I think, for most people to even digest that it's real. Which, you know, I think is one of the things that targets are up against, because, and it's one of the things that's going on in Julian Assange's persecution. Everybody's targeting. It's so extreme. It's so beyond the pale. It's so difficult to even absorb that it happens, that people kind of don't absorb that it's happening and that it happens. It's kind of a psychological barrier to recognizing it, because it's so abusive. No, it's so horrific. I mean, that's sexual assault, isn't it? Tricking somebody into a relationship. It's rape. It's horrific. So it's very difficult to believe it happens.
And it's something that's very difficult to prove, too, because just the way that it's designed, unless you turn it on them and follow that person and figure out what they're doing, which is infinitely difficult, there's really no way except conjecture and speculation and documented evidence that this person is nefarious. So it's terrifying the way that they have the ability to do this and do it at the behest of the people that control our government.
It's shocking, isn't it? Yeah, and the fact that victims won't be believed, and you know, it gets back to the same sort of principles in SAMS. Victims can't even explain what's happening to them, so it's, you know, it creates impunity, doesn't it? And voicelessness for victims, which is what the whole persecution of truth tellers is about as well, which is really about exposing abuse of people, whether it's children whose fathers murdered in front of them, Reuters journalists murdered, the tens of thousands of other people killed in wars. You know, it's all about bringing that to light. And SAMS and silencing WikiLeaks and targeting activists, it's all about keeping that in the dark, you know, keeping us in the dark and keeping that undercover. So it's important. You know, I mean, people say it's about exposing the crimes of the powerful, which it is, but it's also about standing up for victims of abuse and bringing that to light, you know, and fighting Julian Assange's persecution. I mean, WikiLeaks and Julian Assange are all about that, all about exposing abuse and standing up for the oppressed and the powerless. I think that gets forgotten. And activists are becoming abused and oppressed journalists. So it's all part of the same thing. So it's I think that, you know, in talking about it's great. I think I really agree. It's important to keep talking about the content of the WikiLeaks releases, and because the conversation keeps getting moved from that to, you know, smears of the people exposing the abuses and the truth and what's really happened. So I think that you're all absolutely right. That's a really important part of it, to keep talking about the content of the material that WikiLeaks and Julian Assange are all about sharing.
Are you ready to try again, Liz?
Yeah, I'll try again. This is so embarrassing.
Oh, you're fine. It's new.
Love you guys. I so love you guys. Okay, here we go. Okay, you've seen this before, but I just want to end with this. And it follows up nicely after what you were just saying, Lissa. This is again from the Stratfor files. This is Stratfor, and it's really disturbing that somebody in Stratfor is talking about how from a very good contact at the FBI. This is what this person is saying at the FBI about Julian Assange. How come you guys haven't picked this left-wing lunatic, see, they're calling him left-wing, lunatic, WikiLeaks founder, up on some sort of trumped-up charge? Okay, so let that sink in for a minute. They've got a government subcontractor in contact with the FBI, and the FBI is asking Stratfor, why haven't you framed the founder of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, with crimes he didn't commit, basically? And then the best part, and this is what I'll leave you with, at least for showing all these documents tonight, is the First Amendment overprotects journalists. That's their philosophy right there in a nutshell. If I do a projection, if I do projection bombing, this is going to be one of my first slides up there. And frankly, I really, really hope, I would assume that the lawyers have gone through with a fine-tooth comb all of the leaked documents of WikiLeaks that have Julian Assange's name in it. But if by some weird chance they miss this, I really, really hope they take this to court to show that their dirty FBI is contacting Stratfor. And I hope they find out. They demand in discovery somehow who the hell was that FBI agent and put him in prison. So that's my final positive thought for tonight. Sorry about all this, these tech issues. Okay, I'm done. I'm gonna try to.
Oh, and there is no need to apologize. I love breaking down the documents and going through them, so that's super, super cool. So I really appreciate you coming on and doing that with us.
Yeah.
We are going to close out for the night, though. You can follow us on Twitter at action_4Assange. You can find me personally at Andrew Zigman. And I just want to give a big thank you to Lissa and to Liz for joining us this evening and sharing their wealth of information on different things.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me on here. And I want to give a huge shout out and say how much I love everyone out there for helping me during the coronavirus crisis. And thank you, all you guys on here, for helping me. And let's free Julian Assange.
Where can people find your stuff, Liz?
I am supposed to start a stream on YouTube, and I just have to get myself together and do it. So look for more presentations like this on my YouTube channel. And on Twitter, I'm at LizActivate. And I'm probably one of the few people who still does Facebook. So I also have Elizabeth Mueller Facebook page. Oh, but you know what? Join my Stop TPP, sorry, my Free Julian Assange call team. I have a Facebook page called Free Julian Assange Call Team, and we call all of our representatives daily to free Julian Assange.
Is Misty's camera working?
Misty's camera's working.
Hi. It's not my night, guys. It's not my night. It's really not.
And some final thoughts?
Well, I mean, I'm glad that we got Lissa and Liz on tonight. I'm glad we got to talk about SAMs more. I think that's something that we need to talk about. It's pretty extreme. And hopefully everybody can kind of try to get through to people that what's happening to Julian is like, that's coming for us. We got to be ready for that. Honestly, I still can't believe that more independent left media isn't covering it. It's really depressing. But yeah, other than that, you guys can just find me on Twitter at Sarcasm Stardust. Thanks for having me on again. Sorry, it was a little hectic on my end tonight, guys. Sorry. But yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thank you for everything you do. Thank you, all of you.
Oh, you too.
I'm trying. I have a lot to learn, but let's all keep it up. And yeah, thanks to everyone out there. Oh, is he still there?
Yeah, we were waiting for Steve.
Okay, yeah. Y'all, if you're just seeing me for the first time, my name is Steve Poikinen. I host a show called Slow News Day, which you can find here on YouTube by typing Slow News Day Podcast into the search bar. I am also finally and happily on Rockfin, so you can find me there, as well as D Live and Periscope. This tomorrow, I will be interviewing Green Party presidential candidate Dario Hunter. On Sunday, I will be interviewing Libertarian Party candidate Adam Kokesh. And on Cinco de Mayo, I will be interviewing John freaking McAfee, the Mad Pirate himself. And I have content up more or less every day. So please check that out. Hit the bell for a notification. You may or may not get them, but go ahead and do it anyway. And yeah, I thank you to Lissa Johnson and to Liz Mueller. You're both tremendous. And Misty and Andrew, you guys rock. Sleepy Josh on the ones and twos, and Kimber, the emotional support panda. Love y'all. Yeah, and check us out, or not tomorrow, but Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Central. Central, Pacific. I can count.
Love you, Steve.